I'm Ethan Carter, an officer in the U.S. Army, and I'm 33 years old. This is the account of everything I once had, the battle to get a piece of it back, and the way I found to rebuild myself from the wreckage. It all circles back to my childhood home in Oklahoma, a sturdy two-story place where the thick, dusty heat of late summer would drift right through my open bedroom window. You won't find any stories of mansions or inherited fortunes here. I've never been a man of great means. My only real assets are a steady pulse in my chest and the service rifle that's been my one constant companion across sun-scorched landscapes. The house where I came of age was a simple red brick structure, the kind you see all over the suburbs. It wasn't fancy, but my mother and father kept it spotless. I can still picture how the hardwood floors shone under the afternoon light and smell the sharp, clean scent of polish that always hung in the air, mixing with the rich aroma of my mom's morning coffee. My folks were the very definition of Oklahoma's working middle class, comfortable enough, but they never took anything for granted. They found their real wealth in their sons, telling anyone who would listen about every small success my little brother Leo and I ever had. Their pride was a quiet, constant force in our lives. My life took a significant turn when I met Chloe. She was a woman with a brilliant smile that could disarm anyone and eyes that held a universe of dreams. We fell in love quickly, a whirlwind romance that felt like something out of a movie. She made me feel seen in a way I never had before. A year later, we were married, and for 5 years our life together felt like a quiet harbor. It was my sanctuary from the harsh realities of my profession. We weren't wealthy, but we built a comfortable existence. Our home was filled with laughter and the easy rhythm of two people who believed they had forever. Then came the deployment. In early 2017, my unit was ordered to Afghanistan. The farewell at the airport was gut-wrenching. Chloe's tears felt like acid on my skin, and her promise to wait for me was the only thing I held on to. "I'll be right here," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm not going anywhere." Those words became my mantra, a shield against the fear and chaos that awaited. For 6 months, I clung to her letters and our brief, staticky video calls. Her face on the screen was a lifeline, a reminder of the world I was fighting to get back to. I returned home on a sweltering afternoon in August 2017. The flight had been long. My body ached with exhaustion, but my heart was pounding with anticipation. I couldn't wait to hold Chloe in my arms, to fall back into the life I'd missed so desperately. I pictured her running to me the moment I walked through the door. Instead, I was met with an unnerving silence. The house felt hollow, sterile. Her scent was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness that made the hair on my arm stand up. I called her name, my voice echoing in the stillness. No answer. I walked through the rooms, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. The bedroom closet was half empty. Her favorite dresses, the shoes she wore on our first date, all gone. It was on the nightstand that I found it, a single sheet of paper folded neatly. It wasn't a letter full of explanation or regret. It was a divorce decree, cold and impersonal, waiting for my signature. My legs gave out from under me and I collapsed onto the floor, the rustle of the paper the loudest sound in the world. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My best friend, Mark, was the one who pieced the story together for me. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, his face etched with pity. He told me that just 2 months after I deployed, Chloe had started seeing someone else. It was my own younger brother, Leo. The two people I trusted most in the world had conspired behind my back, their betrayal a secret they shared while I was a world away, counting the days until I could come home. The news didn't just hurt, it shattered my entire reality. The pain was a living thing inside me. I felt a humiliation so profound it was suffocating. How could they? My brother, who I'd protected my whole life, and my wife, the woman I'd built my world around. I tried to confront them, but their justifications were just a cascade of empty words about falling in love and how it just happened. They couldn't even look me in the eye. Their guilt was a pathetic shield against the devastation they had caused. I saw them for what they were. Two weak people who had chosen the easiest path no matter who it destroyed. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my empty house, the divorce papers on the table, and felt the foundation of my life crumble to dust. The man who had faced enemy fire without flinching was now undone by a piece of paper and a story of casual betrayal. I thought about my parents, about the shame this would bring them, their two sons now irrevocably broken. The pride they had in us would turn to ash. It felt like the end of everything. A profound, desolate loneliness washed over me, colder and more terrifying than any desert night. My father, Arthur Carter, was a retired banker, a man of such intense discipline that he'd wear a freshly pressed suit just to go to the grocery store. My mother, Margaret, was his counterpart, a woman who pursued perfection in all things, from the way the dinner table was set to the flawless reputation our family maintained. I always knew they loved me, but their love was braided with the heavy cords of expectation. As the eldest son, I was the vessel for all their hopes, the one designated to bring a specific kind of honor to our name. I was supposed to become a lawyer or a doctor. That was the future they had meticulously mapped out for me. Their dreams for my life felt like a suit of clothes that would never fit. So at 22, right after I'd graduated from college, I enlisted in the military. That choice landed with a quiet thud in our pristine home. The disappointment was a tangible thing, though they never spoke of it directly. I saw it in the slight pain tightening of my father's jaw, and I heard it in the soft, weary way my mother would sigh when talking about all the opportunities she felt I had cast aside. But for all their unspoken grief, the Army was the place I finally found my footing. It was there I learned what it meant to hold the line between life and death, to become a shield for those who couldn't defend themselves. I discovered my own form of honor, one forged in grit and duty, not in a courtroom or an operating theater. For that choice, I have never had a single regret. My younger brother, Leo, who is 28, is the absolute center of my parents' world. He is their pride and joy. He went to law school just as they'd hoped, and still lives comfortably on their financial support, a master at the art of pleasing everyone around him. Leo possesses an effortlessly charming smile, hair that is always perfectly in place, and a silver tongue that can make anyone nod along in agreement. In every way, he is the flawless son my parents had always envisioned me becoming. Honestly, I'm not jealous of him, but there are moments when I find myself wondering if he's ever had to face a single day of genuine hardship, or if his entire existence has just been a smooth, frictionless glide. He moves through the world like a soft wind, leaving no real mark behind. And then there was Chloe. Even just thinking her name still causes a painful stutter in my chest. 30 years old, she worked as a nurse at the main hospital downtown. We first crossed paths in college at some loud party I had been reluctantly pulled to by a few friends. I saw her standing off by herself in a corner of the crowded room. She was wearing a simple dress the color of pale sea foam, and her dark, shining hair was pulled back from her face. While everyone else was clutching a beer, she was holding a glass of water. She caught my eye and offered a small, knowing smile. And in that instant, a thought flashed through my mind with absolute certainty. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with that woman. Chloe was nothing like anyone I had ever known before. She had this incredible mix of gentleness and strength, and she possessed the uncanny ability to make me laugh even when I was in my foulest moods. She listened to me. She really listened, as if every single word I uttered held some deep importance. We had been together for 6 years, a time filled with its own trials. We navigated the difficult period after she was laid off from her job, and she stayed by my side when a training exercise went wrong and landed me in the hospital for 2 weeks. Through it all, Chloe was the one holding my hand, her voice a steady whisper promising that everything would be all right, even when I could see the fear lingering in her own eyes. Just 2 weeks ago, under a full moon that bathed our small front yard in silver light, I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. The ring was nothing fancy, just a simple band of silver that I'd purchased with my own savings. Chloe looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she didn't give me the answer I was desperate to hear. She didn't say yes. Instead, she just pulled me into a fierce hug and whispered into my ear, "Ethan, I need some time, but I will wait for you." I managed a nod. Even as my heart sank like a stone in my chest, I knew what was coming. The deployment I was facing would stretch on for a grueling 18 months, and a cold dread washed over me at the thought that such a vast expanse of time and distance could slowly chip away at what we had. But despite that fear, I chose to believe in her. I had to. I have to trust her. As I sit here now, putting these thoughts down, I'm in the middle of packing my gear. My rucksack is slumped in the corner of the room right next to a pair of combat boots still caked with dirt from my last field exercise. I've gone over my checklist a dozen times. My uniforms are folded, my knife is secured, and I've tucked away a small empty notebook where I plan to write to Chloe. I've never been a man who is good with words, but I need her to feel me thinking of her every single day. I'm pinning my hopes on those letters to become a lifeline between our two separate worlds, a way to keep what we have from fraying during the long months of silence. On the final night before I was scheduled to leave, I found myself sitting alone on the porch watching the faint moonlight struggle through the living room curtains. A warm breeze drifted in, carrying the familiar Oklahoma heat and the sweet, earthy smell of wildflowers blooming in the nearby field. My mind wandered to my parents, to Leo, and then, inevitably, to Chloe. I was thinking about everything I was about to leave behind and everything I was about to confront. War is never a simple thing. I've watched friends and comrades fall. I've heard the deafening roar of explosions tear through the dead of night. This time, however, a different kind of fear has taken root in my gut. It's not the fear of dying. It's the fear of losing everything that makes my life worth living in the first place. The following morning, I pulled on my uniform, hefted my rucksack onto my shoulder, and walked out the front door. My parents were waiting for me on the porch. My mother wrapped me in a hug, her tears flowing freely down her face. "Be careful, my son," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. My father, true to form, just gave my shoulder a firm, solid pat, his expression grim. Leo hung back behind them, offering a weak smile and some generic parting words about staying safe. Chloe met me at the airport to see me off. She was wearing that same pale green dress, the one I loved so much, and her hair was down, falling naturally around her shoulders. We didn't exchange many words. We just stood there, our hands locked together in a tight grip. "Write to me, okay?" she asked, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "I promise," I answered, giving her hand a squeeze. "Will you wait for me?" She nodded, but her eyes were filled with a deep, unreadable sadness that I couldn't begin to understand. I desperately wanted to ask her what was wrong, to press her for what she was really thinking. But just then, the airport loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing the final boarding call for my flight. I leaned in and kissed her, a rushed, desperate kiss that was over too soon. Then I turned and walked toward the gate without looking back. When I finally risked a glance back over my shoulder, she was still standing there, a small, solitary figure in the midst of the swirling crowd. I watched her until she was just a blur, and then she was gone. On the plane, I pressed my face against the small, cool window, watching Oklahoma shrink below me into a patchwork quilt of green and brown. I pulled out the small notebook and began to write my first letter. Chloe, this is the first day I'm away from you. I have no idea what's waiting for me out here, but I know one thing for certain. I love you. Please wait for me. I folded the page with care, picturing it arriving in her hands. I imagined her reading my words, a soft smile spreading across her face. That single image was enough to give me a sliver of the strength I knew I would need to endure the coming months. I had no way of knowing that back in the world I'd just left, a story of betrayal was already being written by the two people I should have been able to trust the most. My deployment dropped me onto a military base set squarely in the middle of a vast desert. The sun was a relentless force, baking my skin day after day, and the fine sand worked its way into everything, from the fibers of my uniform to the spaces between my teeth. The constant low drone of Humvee engines, the sporadic pop of distant gunfire, and the sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder became the new, unsettling rhythm of my existence. My duties involved running patrols, escorting supply convoys through hostile territory, and on occasion, engaging the enemy in direct combat. Every single day was a fight, not just against the tangible threats lurking outside the wire, but against the gnawing fear that coiled inside my own chest. I'll never forget one particular night when an enemy artillery shell detonated less than a mile from our position. The ground shook violently. Our entire team spent the rest of the night on high alert, lying flat on the hard-packed earth, listening to the eerie whistle of the desert wind as it mixed with the concussive blasts. In the darkness, I clutched the worn photograph of Chloe I kept in my breast pocket, whispering her name like a prayer. Wait for me. Please just wait for me. Her letters were my only anchor. Every night, huddled under the weak, flickering light of a camp lantern, I would pull out my notebook and pour my thoughts onto the page for her. I described the grueling, endless patrol days, the sudden sandstorms that would swallow the sun and turn the sky to a murky brown, and the antics of a young private named Sanchez who was always singing old folk songs to keep our spirits up. Chloe, I wrote one evening, I saw the most incredible sunset tonight, a blaze of fire across the entire desert sky. I wish you were here to see it with me. Each sentence I wrote felt like I was spinning another thread, a line that connected me back across the ocean to Oklahoma, back to her. I sent my letters out through the military mail system, trusting they would find their way to her. Regular phone calls were impossible. The satellite connection was unreliable at best, and any moment of downtime was a precious commodity. Still, I held on to the belief that my letters would be enough, that they would be a testament to the promise I had made. There were so many nights I would just lie on my cot, staring up at the canvas ceiling of the tent, my mind filled with images of Chloe. I'd see her smile so clearly, remember the focused way she'd pull her hair back when she was on a long shift at the hospital, and feel the ghost of that last tight hug she gave me before I walked onto the plane. I would find myself wondering what she was doing at that very moment. Was she standing under the big maple tree in her front yard, looking up at the same moon I was? I wrote to her almost every week, even if all I could manage were a few short, hurried lines. Chloe, I'm all right, I miss you. I'm no poet, but every word I put on that paper was the absolute truth, a piece of my heart sent out into the world for her. The months bled into one another, and I existed in two separate realities. One of sand, gunfire, and bone-deep exhaustion, and the other made of ink and paper. A world where I could dream of the day I would finally go home, get down on one knee in front of her again, and this time hear her say yes. I never received a single letter back from her, but I chalked it up to her being overwhelmed with work. Or maybe just the notoriously slow and unreliable military mail system. It never occurred to me to doubt her. I trusted Chloe as completely as I trusted my own heartbeat. Then after 18 months that had stretched into an eternity of dirt and fear, I finally stepped off the plane at the Oklahoma City airport. I felt like a stranger returning to a world I no longer recognized. The rucksack on my back felt like it was filled with lead, but tucked safely in my pocket was the small silver ring. I had carried it with me through every patrol, every firefight, waiting for the moment I could ask Chloe to be my wife again. I had made it back, a survivor of a tour that many of my brothers in arms had not. Sanchez, the young kid who was always trying to make us laugh with his off-key singing, had been killed in an ambush 3 months before we were scheduled to ship out. I had stood over his flag-draped casket on the tarmac, making a silent vow to live a good life, not just for me but for him and all the others who didn't get to come home. After clearing customs, I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the familiar red brick house in the suburbs, my heart pounding in my chest. My chest was tight with a hopeful, nervous energy. Every beat of my heart painted a picture in my mind, Chloe running out the front door and throwing herself into my arms just like she had in all the dreams that got me through those long nights under a smoke-choked desert sky. I had let my family know my return date, but had specifically asked them not to come to the airport. All I wanted was a quiet family dinner. My parents, Leo and Chloe. That would have been more than enough. But the moment the front door swung open, a heavy, oppressive silence hit me like a physical blow, instantly flash-freezing all my hopes. There was no Chloe. There was no laughter, no joyful reunion, none of the warmth I had spent 18 months fantasizing about. There was only my mother and father sitting stiffly in the living room, their faces so strained it sent a chill down my spine. My mother rose and came to hug me, but her embrace felt hollow, lacking all of its usual comfort. "You're home, Ethan," she said, her voice strangely flat. My father, seated in his armchair in a perfectly pressed suit, just gave me a curt nod, his eyes refusing to meet mine. A knot of dread tightened in my gut. "Where's Chloe?" I asked, the words rushing out. "She knew I was coming home today, right?" My mother let out a long, weary sigh and sank back onto the sofa, gesturing for me to take the armchair opposite her. "Ethan, we need to talk to you about something." Her voice was unnervingly calm, but it did nothing to stop the sudden, frantic hammering in my chest. "Chloe, she's married." I just stared at her, uncomprehending. "She married Leo," my mother continued, her words falling like stones into the silence. "They moved away. They're living in Dallas now." In that moment, it felt as though the floor had simply dissolved from under my feet. The air in the room grew thick and suffocating, and for a terrifying second I was back in the desert, trapped in a blinding sandstorm. "Married?" I echoed, my voice a raw, ragged whisper. "To Leo? My brother? What are you talking about?" It was my father who answered, his tone as rigid and unforgiving as it was when he taught me how to drive at 16. "Ethan, you're the one who chose to be a soldier. You chose to be gone for years at a time. Did you really expect a woman like Chloe to just wait forever? She wanted a stable life, and Leo was able to give her that." I shot up from the chair, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "I wrote to her every single week," I choked out. "I promised her I would come back. How could she do this to me? And Leo, how could he?" My mother looked up at me then, her eyes colder than I had ever seen them. "Ethan, don't be a child," she said, her voice sharp. "You're the one who chose the military. You chose war over your family, over Chloe. Do you really think you have the right to blame anyone else for this?" she went on, her words like ice. "If you had never left, none of this would have happened. Chloe chose the better man. You need to accept that." Each word was a fresh twist of a knife buried deep in my chest. "A child?" I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. "I fought to protect this country. I fought to protect this family. And what did Leo do? He stayed home and stole my fiancée. My father was on his feet now, his voice booming in the quiet room. That is enough, Ethan. You will not stand there and blame your brother. Leo was here. He was taking care of Chloe when you weren't. You're the one who abandoned her, and now you have to live with the consequences. I looked from my father to my mother, the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest allies, and I felt a new kind of pain bloom inside me. It wasn't just about losing Chloe anymore. This was the raw, gaping wound of being betrayed by my own blood. I wanted to scream, to smash my fist through the wall, but I just stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, fighting to keep my legs from buckling. "Where is she?" I asked again, my voice barely audible. "I want to hear this from her." My mother just shook her head, a look of finality on her face. "They've moved, Ethan. She doesn't want to see you." "They have moved on, Ethan," she repeated. "She does not want to see you. You need to let this go." Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the house. The silver ring in my pocket suddenly felt as heavy as a block of lead. I had survived a war. I had survived bombs and bullets and endless sleepless nights, only to come home and find out that the real enemy wasn't hiding in some desert half a world away. The real enemy was right here, inside this house. I stepped out onto the street, the door clicking shut behind me. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't spend one more second under that roof. Chloe, the woman I loved more than my own life, was now my brother's wife. My own family, the people I had trusted implicitly, had not only turned their backs on me but were blaming me for their betrayal. But even through the fog of shock and pain, a small, insistent voice in the back of my mind told me that something was terribly wrong. All those letters I'd sent, all the promises I had held on to like a lifeline, they couldn't have just vanished into thin air. They couldn't have meant nothing. I would find out what really happened, no matter what it took. That night I walked for hours, a ghost haunting the familiar suburban streets of my hometown. I wandered past the dry, overgrown field where Chloe and I used to take long walks, and I paused for a moment under the sprawling old maple tree where I had asked her to marry me. With every breath I took, the silver ring in my pocket seemed to press into my chest, a constant, bitter reminder of everything I had just lost. Eventually, I ended up at a rundown motel just off the highway, its neon sign buzzing and flickering erratically. I lay down on the stiff, uncomfortable bed and just stared up at the water-stained ceiling, trying desperately to make sense of the shattered pieces of my life. Chloe married Leo. They moved to Dallas. My parents think I'm a fool, but none of it added up. Why? Why wouldn't she have waited, and what happened to all of my letters? Was it possible that not a single one ever reached her? The next morning, I woke up with my eyes burning and a new steely sense of purpose solidifying in my gut. I had to have answers, and I knew exactly where I needed to begin my search. The only person left in the world I felt I could trust was Sarah, Chloe's best friend. Sarah and Chloe had been inseparable since their college days. They worked at the same hospital, sharing the kind of secrets that Chloe sometimes didn't even share with me. If anyone knew the real story of what had happened while I was gone, it would be Sarah. I found her number in an old address book, my hand shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. After 3 long rings, Sarah's voice came on the line, tinged with surprise but still warm. "Ethan, is that really you? You're back?" "Sarah, I need to see you," I said, my voice still rough from a night of no sleep. "It's about Chloe. I need you to tell me the truth." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke again, her voice was hushed. "Okay. Meet me at the coffee shop on Elm Street, 11 o'clock. The little cafe on Elm was a place Chloe and I used to go all the time. It had big plate glass windows that looked out onto the busy street. As I pushed open the door, the rich, dark smell of roasting coffee beans filled the air, immediately conjuring up a flood of memories. All those afternoons spent sitting in this very spot, just listening to Chloe tell me stories about her long, chaotic shifts at the hospital. Sarah was already there, tucked into a booth in the corner. Her fair hair was pulled back neatly, and her kind blue eyes were filled with a mixture of pity and genuine concern as she looked at me. She was wearing her nursing scrubs, so she must have just gotten off a shift. I slid into the booth across from her and didn't waste any time. "Sarah, Chloe married Leo. My parents told me she doesn't want to see me. What the hell happened? I need to know." Sarah let out a deep sigh and carefully set her coffee mug down on the table, her eyes darting around as if she was trying to figure out where to even start. "Ethan, I don't know how to tell you this, but you deserve to know what really happened. It's not as simple as they're making it out to be." She began to speak slowly, her voice weighed down with emotion, as if she was being forced to relive every painful moment. She told me that after I'd deployed, Chloe had tried her best to stay strong and hopeful. She waited for my letters, checking the mailbox every single day, but week after week, nothing ever came. "She would call me, just sobbing," Sarah said, her own eyes welling up. "She was convinced you had forgotten all about her. Or worse, that something terrible had happened to you." My chest constricted, the pain sharp and sudden. All those letters I had written, the pages that held every ounce of my love and hope for our future. Where had they all gone? Sarah continued her story, explaining that Chloe had started going over to my parents' house regularly, desperate for any news about me. But every time she went, my mother, Margaret, would say things that were clearly designed to poison Chloe's mind. She kept telling Chloe that you would never leave the army, that you had chosen a life of war over a life with her, Sarah recounted, her voice laced with anger. She told Chloe not to waste her best years waiting for a ghost, that she deserved a man who would always be by her side. My hands tightened into fists under the table, my fingernails digging painfully into my palms. My own mother, the woman I had always believed wanted nothing but my happiness, had systematically dismantled my life while I was gone. "And then," Sarah said, her expression hardening as she spoke his name, "there was Leo." She told me how he had suddenly started appearing everywhere Chloe was. He would show up at the hospital with coffee for her. He would insist on taking her out to dinner, telling her all the things he knew she wanted to hear. She tried to refuse at first, Sarah said, "But you know Chloe. She was so incredibly lonely, Ethan. With no word from you, not a single letter to hold on to, she started to break." Sarah paused, looking at me with an expression of profound guilt. "I tried to warn her, Ethan, I swear I did," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I told her she needed to trust you, to just hold on. But your mother and Leo, they were relentless, like a constant storm just wearing her down." My blood ran cold. "Are you telling me they manipulated her? And my letters? What did they do with my letters?" Sarah nodded slowly. "One afternoon, Chloe was at your parents' house and she saw your mother get the mail. There was a letter with military markings and Chloe was sure it was from you. When she asked your mother about it, Margaret just brushed her off, said it was nothing but a bill. Chloe didn't want to believe the worst, but that's when she really started to get suspicious." Sarah took a deep breath, but by then it was already too late. "Leo proposed to her about 9 months after you deployed. She said yes. Not because she was in love with him, Ethan. It was because she was completely and utterly exhausted. She truly believed that you had abandoned her." Sarah's story left me feeling hollowed out, completely numb. I was so disoriented I could barely think straight. After I left the cafe, I found myself walking back to that old maple tree, the one where I had asked Chloe to be my wife. The Oklahoma wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the familiar scent of dry grass and a flood of painful memories. I could see her gentle smile in my mind's eye, feel the memory of her last desperate hug before I disappeared through the security gate. But now, Sarah's words were a relentless echo in my head, each one a fresh cut. Your mother intercepted your letters. Leo took advantage of her loneliness. She thought you had abandoned her. My own family, the people I had placed my absolute trust in, had systematically destroyed my life, and Chloe, the woman I still loved with every fiber of my being, was now married to my brother. I clutched the silver ring in my pocket, the metal cool against my skin. A part of me wanted to march over to my parents' house and confront them all, to demand the truth. But in that moment, all I could feel was an immense crushing emptiness that threatened to swallow me completely. I didn't go back to the red brick house. I couldn't. The thought of that place, with its gleaming hardwood floors and the comforting aroma of my mother's coffee, now only served as a monument to their betrayal. Instead, I found a small, cheap apartment on the far edge of Oklahoma City. It was a rundown place with stained walls and drafty windows that rattled in their frames whenever the wind blew. It wasn't a home, it was just a place to exist. I threw my rucksack into a corner where it sat next to my dust-caked combat boots, silent monuments to the life I had just left behind. In that small, empty apartment, I wasn't Ethan Carter, the Army officer who had learned to stand firm in the face of chaos and violence. I was just a man who had been cast aside by his family and betrayed by the woman he loved. For the first few days, I barely moved from the bed. I just lay there, staring up at the cracked ceiling, letting the memories of the war and the memories of their betrayal bleed into one another until I couldn't tell them apart. I kept seeing Sanchez's face, the way he looked after the ambush, his blood soaking into the desert sand. I could hear the whistle of incoming mortars, the frantic shouts of my men in the dark. And then I would see Chloe, the look in her eyes when I asked her to marry me, her voice whispering, "I'll wait for you." But she hadn't waited. She had chosen Leo. No, a voice in my head argued. Sarah said she was manipulated. She was pushed into a loveless marriage by my mother and my brother. I wanted so badly to believe that was the whole truth, but the pain was a raging inferno inside me, burning away all logic and reason. I started to keep a journal, but this time it wasn't for Chloe. It was for me. I wrote about the war, about all the letters I had sent into the void, about the countless nights I had spent dreaming of her. Today I found out the truth. I wrote one night, my hand shaking so much the words were barely legible. My family has taken everything from me. But what was my crime? I served my country. I kept my promise to Chloe. Why would they do this to me? Pouring those words onto the page didn't make the pain go away, but it felt like the only thing keeping me from completely losing my mind. After a week of this, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I found a military psychologist who had a small practice near the base in Oklahoma City. Dr. Evans was a woman in her 50s with kind, intelligent eyes. She sat across from me in her quiet office and just listened. "Ethan," she said gently, "you have endured the trauma of war, and now you are facing an immense personal loss. The anger, the pain, the disorientation you're feeling, it's all a normal response, but you can't run from it. You have to face it." I told her everything. I told her about Chloe, about my family, and about the letters that had vanished without a trace. Dr. Evans nodded, jotting down a few notes. Then she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Who are you most angry with, Ethan? Your family, Chloe, or yourself?" I wanted to say my mother, I wanted to say Leo. But deep down, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if I was the one truly at fault. If I had never enlisted, if I had never left Chloe behind, would any of this have happened? The nightmares started soon after. I would dream I was standing alone in the desert, holding a letter for Chloe, but just as I reached for her, a gust of wind would tear it from my hands and carry it away. I dreamed of Leo, a triumphant smirk on his face, standing at the altar and taking Chloe's hand in his. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dr. Evans taught me breathing exercises and encouraged me to write down my dreams as a way to confront them. But with each passing day, I felt myself slipping further and further into a dark place. One afternoon, I was at a small dive bar near the base when a man named David sat down on the stool next to mine. He was a veteran, probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that was weathered and lined. A long, faded scar ran down the side of his cheek. He ordered a beer and then just looked at me. His gaze so direct it felt like he could see right through me, reading every last bit of pain I was trying to hide. "You look like you got hit by a damn truck, Carter," he said, his voice deep and gravelly but with a surprising hint of humor. I don't know why, but I told him my whole story. Not because I was looking for sympathy, but because for the first time I felt like I was talking to someone who might actually understand. David listened patiently, not saying a word until I had finished. Then he took a long swallow of his beer and looked me straight in the eye. "Ethan," he said, "I've seen guys lose it all. Their families, their friends, their own damn minds. But you know what always gets a soldier back on his feet? Justice. If you don't fight for what's right for yourself, who the hell will?" David's words cut through the suffocating darkness inside me like a searchlight. I thought about Chloe, about the letters they had stolen, about my mother and Leo. They had robbed me of my happiness, but I was not a man who knew how to surrender. I had survived a war. I had to believe I could survive this too. I walked out of that bar and into the warm glow of the setting sun. David's words were a drumbeat in my head. Fight for justice. I knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't let myself drown in this pain any longer. I made a decision right then and there. I was going to find those letters, I was going to confront my family, and I was going to drag the truth out into the light. Chloe might be lost to me forever, but I would not let them steal my dignity too. The silver ring in my pocket felt heavy in my hand, a solid reminder that this story wasn't over yet. Back in my small apartment on the edge of the city, I opened up my old laptop, the only personal item I'd brought back with me from the base. The stark blue light of the screen lit up my face, reflecting a pair of eyes that were exhausted but resolute. I started with the information Sarah had given me. My mother had intercepted my letters. Leo had manipulated Chloe, and any letters Chloe might have written to me had also been stolen. If the letters I'd sent from overseas had never reached Chloe, they had to have gone somewhere. And if my mother was the one behind it all, she must have left some kind of trail. I logged into my old military email account, the one I'd used to send Chloe a few messages when I hadn't had time to write a physical letter. My inbox was completely empty, not a single reply. But when I clicked on the sent folder, I saw that several of my outgoing emails had been deleted, and I knew for a fact that I hadn't been the one to do it. Someone else had gotten into my account. I'm no computer genius, but I knew I needed to find someone who was. I called up Alex, an old buddy from my unit who had worked in cybersecurity before he enlisted. "Alex, I need to get back some deleted emails," I said into the phone, my voice tight with stress. "Is that even possible?" "What kind of mess did you get yourself into this time, Carter?" Alex asked, his tone halfway between joking and serious. "A big one," I answered. "My family, they did something with my letters. I have to know what happened." Alex agreed to help me. While I waited for him to work his magic, I went back to my journal, meticulously writing down every detail Sarah had shared with me. My mother at the mailbox, Leo showing up at the hospital, Chloe's emotional exhaustion. I created a timeline starting from the day I left Oklahoma and ending on the day Chloe married Leo. 9 months. It had only taken 9 months for my entire world to be torn apart. I couldn't help but wonder how Chloe was doing now. Was she happy in Dallas with my brother? Or was she suffering just like I was? I knew I couldn't do this on my own. I looked up a lawyer named Robert Miller, a man who specialized in family law and had been recommended by one of the vets at the bar. His office was in a small building in downtown Oklahoma City, a cramped room with shelves overflowing with case files and the faint, dusty smell of old paper. I sat across the desk from him and laid out the whole story. The stolen letters, my family's manipulation, and the crushing shock of discovering that Chloe had married Leo. "I need proof," I said, my voice steady. "I need to know exactly what they did, and I want justice." Mr. Miller nodded, his gaze sharp and focused. "If your family intentionally interfered with your mail, that's a serious federal offense. But we'll need concrete evidence. The physical letters, emails, any documents that can prove they deliberately obstructed your communication." He agreed to take my case on the condition that I could bring him something solid to work with. "Start with your parents' house," he advised. "If they kept those letters, there's a chance they could still be there." The thought of going back to that red brick house, the place where my parents had so coldly dismissed my pain, made my stomach turn. But I knew I had no other choice. One evening, knowing my parents would be out at a neighbor's dinner party, I drove over. Standing on the front porch, my heart was hammering against my ribs, just as hard as it did on night patrols in the desert, a familiar mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through me. I let myself in with my old key. The familiar scent of coffee and lemon polish filled the air, but this time it just made me sick. After what felt like hours of searching, turning the house upside down, I finally found them. They were all there. The letters I had written to Chloe and the ones she had written to me. My mother had stashed them all away in an old wooden box tucked under her bed. A few days later, Alex called to tell me that he had traced the unauthorized access to my email account. The IP address was from my parents' home computer. Holding those letters in my hand, I finally had the proof I needed. These were my weapons now, and I was going to use them to bring the truth to light. David had been right. I had to fight for my own justice. I was no longer a broken soldier lost in the darkness. I was Ethan Carter, and I was going to make my family answer for what they had done. But I knew I needed a better plan than just storming over to their house and confronting them. If I went to my parents or to Leo, they would just deny everything. They would twist the story and blame me just like they had before. I needed the truth to come out in a way they couldn't control. I needed the world to know what they had done. I thought of an old friend from college named Jessica. She was now an investigative reporter for the local paper, with a reputation for being fearless and relentless when she was on a story. I had helped her out of a tight spot once back in our sophomore year, and I knew she still owed me one. I called her, my voice surprisingly calm despite the frantic beating of my heart. "Jessica," I said, "I have a story for you, but I need to stay anonymous. It's about a soldier who was betrayed by his own family while he was deployed." Jessica agreed to meet me at a quiet coffee shop in the city. I laid out the whole story for her, from the letters I had written to Chloe every week, to my mother's cruel manipulation, to the devastating shock of discovering that Chloe had married my brother. Jessica listened intently, her eyes glinting with the kind of focused intensity that reporters get when they know they've stumbled onto something big. "Ethan, this isn't just a family drama," she said, her voice firm. "This is a story about duty, betrayal, and the hidden battles that soldiers fight when they come home. I'll make sure it gets the attention it deserves." I handed her the box of letters along with the information from Alex about my email account. "Just refer to me as a veteran," I told her. I don't want any personal recognition from this, I just want justice." Jessica nodded, understanding completely. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. I had just lit a fuse, and I had no idea how big the explosion was going to be. 4 days later, the story broke. It was on the front page of the Sunday paper under a bold, stark headline, "A Soldier's Homefront Betrayal." Jessica's article was brilliant. She kept my identity completely anonymous but laid out every single detail of the story with surgical precision. A decorated army officer sending letters home from a combat zone to the woman he loved, only to return and discover that his own family had intercepted his mail, poisoned his fiancée's mind with lies, and orchestrated her marriage to his own brother. The article included heartbreaking excerpts from the letters that had been hidden away in that wooden box. Jessica ended the piece with a single devastating question. Is a soldier's loyalty to his country worth the price of betrayal from his own family? The story exploded. It spread across the internet like a wildfire. By lunchtime, it was all over social media, being shared and reposted by veterans organizations, local news channels, and thousands of complete strangers. I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through the endless stream of comments on social media. "I can't believe a family would do this to one of our soldiers. They should be ashamed of themselves," one person wrote. Another comment read, "This story made me cry. I lost my family while I was deployed too. This soldier needs our support." Alex sent me a text. "Carter, you did the right thing. The whole platoon is behind you, man." Back in my quiet suburban neighborhood, my family started to feel the heat. Neighbors who used to wave to my mother when she was out in the garden now looked right through her. The friends who used to come over for dinner every weekend suddenly stopped calling. My father, a man who had built his entire life around maintaining a pristine and respectable reputation, was suddenly being ostracized by his friends at the country club. But the biggest blow by far landed on Leo. The high-powered Dallas law firm where he worked suspended him indefinitely, citing conduct unbecoming and damaging to the firm's reputation. Sarah told me through a mutual friend that Leo had shown up at his office looking like he hadn't slept in a week, desperately trying to explain himself, but no one would even listen to him. I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction when I heard the news. There was no joy, just a cold, hollow feeling inside me. It was the feeling of justice finally arriving, slowly and inevitably, like a tide coming in. About a month after the article was published, I finally left that run-down apartment on the edge of the city. I walked away from the stained walls and the rattling windows that had been the silent witnesses to so many of my darkest nights. I moved into a new place closer to the heart of the city. It was small, but it was clean and bright, with big windows that looked out over a park. The pale wood floors, the smell of fresh paint, and the small table I set up by the window where I put my journal and a small cactus David had given me. It all felt like the start of something new. "You need something that's as tough as you are," he'd said, a warm, wrinkled smile spreading across his weathered face. This apartment didn't feel like home yet, but it was a place where a new version of Ethan could begin to take shape. I got a job at a local veterans support center, working as a peer counselor for men and women who, like me, had come home with invisible scars. The pay wasn't great, but every time I was able to help another vet work through a nightmare or find a glimmer of hope, I felt a little piece of my own soul begin to heal. I met people like Mike, a former Marine who had lost a leg in Iraq, and Maria, a combat medic who was haunted by PTSD. I would just listen to their stories, sharing just enough of my own to let them know that I truly understood. "You've been through the ringer, Carter," Mike said to me one day, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're a hell of a lot stronger than you think you are." I started jogging in the park every morning, my breath clouding in the cool Oklahoma City air. I would stop at a particular wooden bench and watch the sunrise, the golden light filtering through the leaves of the oak trees. It always reminded me of that old maple in Chloe's front yard. I didn't cry anymore when I thought of her, but the ache was still there, like an old wound that throbbed whenever the weather changed. I still carried the silver ring with me everywhere I went. Not as a painful reminder, but as a testament to the fact that I had loved, I had fought, and I had survived. My family didn't give up. About 2 weeks after I moved into my new apartment, my mother called and left me a voicemail. The first I'd heard from her since that day. "Ethan, you cannot do this to our family," she said, her voice shaking. "You know I love you. Please call me back." I could hear the fear in her voice, but underneath it was a current of pure, unadulterated anger. I deleted the message without a second thought. My father called a few days later, his tone predictably stern. "Ethan, this has gone on long enough. You are destroying this family. We need to talk." I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the call back button for a long moment before I just shut the phone off completely. I had no interest in hearing their excuses or letting them try to blame me all over again. Leo was the one who tried the hardest to get through to me. He sent me a long, rambling text message. "Brother, I never wanted any of this to happen. Chloe, she chose me. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" I read his words and let out a short, bitter laugh. Forgive him? He had preyed on Chloe's loneliness and vulnerability. He had stolen my future, and now he had the audacity to ask for my forgiveness? I blocked his number without sending a reply. Sarah told me that Leo was starting to come apart at the seams. His law firm hadn't just suspended him. They were now talking about firing him outright because of the public backlash. My mother had become a recluse, too afraid to even leave the house because of the neighbors' judgment. And my father, a man who had once been so obsessed with his reputation, now just sat in his living room all day, staring silently out at the yard. I didn't take any pleasure in knowing that they were suffering. I just felt that same cold, empty void inside me. Justice had been served, but it hadn't done anything to fill the hole in my heart. About 2 months later, I got a text from Sarah. "Ethan," it read, "Chloe wants to see you. She's not doing well. She's in Dallas, but she'll come to Oklahoma City if you'll agree to see her." My heart started to pound as I read the words on the screen. Chloe, the woman I had loved more than anything. The woman I had built all my dreams around, now my brother's wife. I texted Sarah back. "What does she want?" Sarah's reply was almost instantaneous. "She just wants to talk to you. She wants to tell you her side of the story. She regrets everything, Ethan. Leo doesn't love her. He just wanted to win." I hesitated. A part of me was desperate to see her, to hear her voice again, to look into her eyes and find out if she was telling the truth. But another part of me was terrified. I was afraid of tearing open a wound that had just barely started to heal. I was afraid that I wasn't strong enough to face her. The next morning, I went for my usual run in the park. I sat on my bench and watched the sun come up. I thought about David and Mike and all the other vets I was working with. They were all facing their own demons head-on. Why couldn't I do the same? I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah back. "Okay, tell her to meet me at the park by my apartment, Saturday at 10. Saturday came. A cool, clear day with a bright blue sky and a few white clouds drifting lazily overhead. I stood under a big oak tree in the park wearing a plain blue shirt, my hands shoved in my pockets. The silver ring was still there, a familiar weight against my leg. A few minutes later, Chloe appeared. She looked so small in her oversized gray coat, her dark hair uncombed and falling around her face. She was thinner than I remembered, and her eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for days. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking. She stopped a few feet away from me. Thank you for coming." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat down on the wooden bench, a small, awkward space between us that felt as wide as an ocean. She was the first one to speak, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know if there's anything I can say that will make you forgive me, but I need you to know the truth. When you left, I waited for your letters. I checked the mail every single day." She took a shaky breath. "Your mother. She told me you didn't love me anymore. She said you had chosen the army over me. She was the one who took the letters, Ethan. I saw her take one out of the mailbox once, but when I asked her about it, she just said it was a bill. I wanted to trust you, but I was so lonely." My heart twisted in my chest as I listened to her. "And Leo," she continued, her voice cracking, "he was just always there. He brought me coffee at work. He took me out to dinner. He kept telling me you were never coming back. I was so weak, Ethan. I really believed that you had abandoned me. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. Not because I loved him, but because I was so tired of being alone, but I was wrong. I was so wrong, I never stopped loving you." Tears were streaming down her face now, silent and steady. A part of me wanted to reach out and pull her into my arms to wipe away her tears and tell her it was all going to be okay. But I stayed where I was. My hands clenched into tight fists in my pockets. "Chloe," I said, my own voice hoarse with emotion, "do you have any idea what those letters meant to me? I wrote to you every single night. I was surrounded by chaos and death, and those letters were the only thing that kept me sane. They were the only thing that kept you with me, and they took all of that away from us." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I know, Ethan. I read the article. I know what your mother did. I am so sorry. If I had just been stronger, if I hadn't let them get inside my head." Her voice broke and she couldn't go on. I couldn't stop myself. I reached out and took her hand. It was ice cold and trembling, like the hand of someone who had been lost in a storm for a very long time. "I wouldn't blame you if you hated me," she whispered, her eyes pleading with mine. I needed you to know how sorry I am." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I could still see the woman I had fallen in love with in her eyes. They were still gentle and sincere, but now they were shadowed with a deep, lasting pain. "I don't hate you, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet. "But I don't know if I can forgive you." "Not yet," she nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Then she stood up. "I understand," she said. "I just want you to be happy, Ethan. You deserve to be happy." And with that, she turned and walked away, her small figure slowly disappearing under the canopy of the oak trees. 6 months after that day in the park, I left Oklahoma City. Not because I was running away, but because I knew I needed a true, fresh start. I moved to Austin, a city full of life and music, with a wide, slow-moving river cutting right through its heart. I rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood with a little balcony that looked out over a sea of red-tiled roofs. Every morning I would wake up to the cheerful sound of birds chirping just outside my window. The apartment was clean and bright, and it smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. I filled a small bookshelf with my psychology textbooks and the memoirs of other veterans, and right by the window, David's little cactus was thriving, a constant, silent reminder that it was possible to survive even the harshest of deserts. I continued my counseling work at the Austin Veterans Center, a low-slung brick building with a small courtyard that was always full of wildflowers. This job had become my anchor, the place where I was finally able to find some meaning after so many months of being lost in the darkness. I worked with vets like Miguel, a former Special Forces operator who was haunted by nightmares of firefights, and Sarah, an ex-Air Force pilot who was wrestling with an unbearable weight of guilt over a mission that had gone wrong. I would sit with them in the quiet counseling room, the afternoon sun streaming through the window and falling across the old wooden table. And I would just listen as they told me stories they had never dared to tell another living soul. I would share pieces of my own story with them. Not everything, but just enough to let them know that I understood what they were going through. I thought I had lost it all once, I told Miguel one afternoon as he was telling me about his nightmares. But I learned that no matter how much you lose, you can always rebuild. You just have to do it one brick at a time. In the afternoons, I taught classes on coping skills, guiding other vets through breathing exercises, showing them how to use a journal to process their thoughts, and helping them find ways to confront their own traumatic memories. I would stand in front of the class, my voice calm and steady, and I would look out at a sea of faces that were weathered and tired but still held a flicker of hope. We can't change the past, I would tell them, but we can choose how we let it define our future. The fact that you are here, that you are alive, that you are still fighting, that in itself is a victory. Those words weren't just for them, they were for me too. Every time I helped another veteran find their way back to the light, I felt my own scars begin to fade, just a little bit. Every morning I would go for a run along the river walk, past the old stone bridges and the little restaurants that were already filling the air with the delicious smell of breakfast tacos. I would always stop at the same bench and watch the sun come up, its golden light dancing on the surface of the water. I still carried the silver ring with me, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It was just a part of me, a part of my story. I would think about Chloe and I would think about my family, but the pain didn't cut so deeply anymore. I was learning how to let go, not to forget, but to stop letting the past hold me prisoner. One evening I was walking home from the center when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Ethan," it read, "Chloe sent you a letter. She asked me to forward it to you. Should I send it?" I froze on the sidewalk, my hand clutching my phone. Chloe. I hadn't heard a word from her since that day in the park, the day she had stood in front of me and cried and begged for my forgiveness. I hesitated for a long moment, then I typed my reply. "Yes. Send it. Thank you." 3 days later, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. The address was written in Chloe's familiar, elegant handwriting. I sat down at my kitchen table, the light from the lamp overhead illuminating the stark white of the envelope, and I could feel my heart begin to race. I took a deep breath, slit the envelope open, and began to read. "Ethan, I don't know if you will ever read this, but I feel like I have to write it anyway. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I regret what I did every single day. I regret not being strong enough to trust you. I regret believing your mother's lies. I regret letting Leo manipulate me. I'm still living in Dallas, but it's not really a life. Leo doesn't love me. He never did. He just wanted to win. I'm trying to rebuild my life now, one day at a time, just like you are. Sarah told me that you're working with other veterans in Austin now. I am so proud of you, Ethan. You have always been the strongest person I have ever known. I hope that one day you will be able to find the same kind of peace that you have helped so many others find. I won't write to you again. I won't bother you anymore. I just want you to be happy. Chloe." I read the letter over and over again, and I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Her letter wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a goodbye. It wasn't an ending, but a release, a way for both of us to finally close this chapter and move on. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the small wooden box I kept on my bookshelf, the one where I kept all the mementos from my time in the service. A faded picture of Sanchez, my old unit patch, and now, Chloe's letter. I closed the lid of the box and I didn't write back. Not because I was still angry, but because I knew that we both needed time and space to heal on our own.